All right, welcome back to the Phil Bach podcast. It's been about a year since I last recorded. It feels great to be back. I want to thank our listeners for coming back, and we've got some really good shows coming up. We are kicking off with a banger today. Before we get started, just real quick, one plug. Last night, I just turned on a paid version of Substack, so you'll get weekly posts, deep dives, and some research on topics like tokenization for traditional asset management, complex modeling and AI signals, REIT valuation divergences, and more. Plus weekly box stock stack posts, the usual stuff, more podcasts and video live streams, and you get to support me. So it's $10 a month and 100 a year. It's the first time I've plugged anything on this show, and hopefully it might be the last. But that's that. So today's guest is one of my favorite authors, thinker, personality, caller of bullshit, advocate for small business owners. Carol Roth writes a weekly newsletter, carolroth.com/news. I highly recommend you subscribe. She does legacy and wishes planning. Is that right? Is that how?
A system for it.
Okay, yeah. We're going to hear more about that. She is, of course, the author of The War on Small Business, The Entrepreneur Equation, and You Will Own Nothing. We're going to talk about small business, big government, AI, and more. Carol, thanks for joining the show.
Yes, great to be back with you, Phil.
I think I want to jump into the deep end of the pool and just get going here. So I want to kick it off talking about the fall of U.S. institutions, the fall of academia we're seeing now, the fall of mainstream media, the fall of the expert class and trust and faith in experts, government, really every domain. Um, is this something you're seeing? Is this something that you agree? Is it irreparable? I mean, where are we here in the process?
In the culture wars. I do. I think that they've been falling for quite some time. And unfortunately, anybody who thought that that was the case felt like they were a little bit of an outlier. And it probably wasn't until Elon bought X, regardless of what you think of the product today, it did open up a sphere for discussions that weren't being had on as robust of a basis. So I think a lot of people who were all sort of feeling the same way, we're able to connect with others and go, okay, yeah, no, I'm not the person who is just feeling this way. And certainly, changes in the culture and taking things a bit too far, I think, has really put a lens on whether education as it used to be is even education anymore, or is it just indoctrination, and does it have any relevant skills, and this is or does it produce relevant skills and a return on ROI, and this is before we even get into the AI conversation. And then certainly I think the media, it just completely, corporate press if you will, completely imploded, their own fault, just by not being trustworthy, and that being able to be proved time and time again. And I think that COVID was really the breaking point for that, and coming out and seeing sort of the disconnect, all the way through what's happening right now with kind of the reimagining of recent history. We were so fooled by Joe Biden, who seemed super clear and not at all like a vegetable, even though the rest of us were calling that out. We're shocked that we were lied to, and that he didn't have the mental capacity that we all told you that you were jerks for pointing out. So, I think that credibility has been shot in a lot of places. It's interesting. Read a Substack by somebody called Tree of Woe, which was really interesting, about AI and how the left had really taken over the culture in all these different ways, from mainstream media to Hollywood and entertainment, but that they've also taken over AI. And if you look at all the LLMs out there, that they are all highly left coded. And even Grok, which is kind of the centrist example, if you ask it certain things, you're going to get some very left leaning BS coming out of that as well. And really warning that if we don't do something to create checks and balances, now, while that foundation is being put in place, that they are going to completely capture every aspect of everything, from education to social issues, entertainment, quote unquote science, or kind of keeping that suppressed. just because that's the way that the foundation is going to be coded. So, we've kind of started to see the war going in one direction, and I just kind of wonder if it's not going to be pulled back in the other direction.
Yeah, I mean, it shouldn't matter, right? Like, people should use these AI tools as a way to, gather information and formulate their own opinion. But of course, it does matter. Of course, it's not the way it works because, people no longer, learn and teach how to think. We're going to teach you what to think. And, so certain are they of their moral high ground that, there's no room for introspection. And, like you recently wrote, so, kind of jumping into the next thing on AI, you recently wrote on Twitter, you said, Americans are not prepared for a double supernova. We are on the precipice of a reset of the global financial order, and we are on the cusp of a possible tech upheaval via AI. Americans have to deal with one of those once in a lifetime shock, but both is unfathomable. And like this AI stuff to me, I mean, it blows my mind. Every few months I sit down and I like kind of catch up. Hey, what's the new thing in AI? What can I do that I couldn't do? And I start like doing a little research every few months, and it's just moving so fast. It's just incredible. Like it's incredible what you can do. And the ability for it was actually a different quote that I was looking for of yours, where you said something to the effect of AI to be used as a tool for
Communism,
communism.
catalyst, yes, catalyst for
Yes.
communism. Yeah.
So what do you mean by that?
So, there's the great, I think they attribute it to Rahm Emanuel, but it may have come from somewhere else first, but never let a good crisis go to waste. And whether you believe that AI is going to gain super intelligence and be like incredibly disruptive, or whether that threat is just hanging out there, it creates the crisis situation to be able for the people who like to espouse centralized power and control, to try to get more of that in place. And so I think the most obvious example, that would not be surprising to anyone are more calls for UBI, which is a ridiculously bad idea that we've disproved through pilot programs and a kind of soft tests, Inflation Reduction Act checks and things like that. Um, but given where our fiscal foundation is right now, the idea of another entitlement program seems so absolutely ludicrous that it's hard to take seriously. But it doesn't matter because the powers that be don't live in the realm of reality, nor do they best bear the risks and costs of not living in the realm of reality. So I think that's kind of the obvious starting point. I think from there, you probably, to the extent that you get real robots that are replacing human tasks, then the question becomes who should own that, and should these corporations, or should the capital class be able to have access to that when nobody else then can take their actual skills and turn that into productive labor. So no doubt that's going to be a catalyst for calls for, sort of centralized ownership in some way, shape, or form. Again, probably before you even get there. And then, kind of as I referenced COVID, imagine, God forbid, but we know it's coming, drone attacks and robot attacks, and sort of the weaponization of physical AI. And as soon as that happens, then that becomes another crisis that, hey, we haven't figured out how to deal with this. So y'all better, go someplace safe and stay there until we can figure it out. And you just kind of go down the line with, one idea after another. And it's really all about, centralized controls as well as the legislation. I'm hearing a lot of things about protection of the AI companies, which I'm, a big fan of making sure that that's protected, but very little counterbalance on the protection of individual rights at the same time. And so, when we think about our individual rights in the digital sphere, which is something I talk about in You Own Nothing, I think that we're very, very behind in raising that as an issue and thinking about that. So, all of these things, if you take them, as a whole, are all these calls to move us into a more centrally planned, something that looks like, communism type of organization.
UBI is interesting because universal basic income for those that don't know, and the idea, the idea is, as I first heard it the first time, was, hey, how many painters, how many artists, how many musicians could there be? How many people can, even, scientists and entrepreneurs, if they only had their basic needs met, they can then pursue their excellence, right, or their passion, and wouldn't that be better for society? But of course, as without the profit motive, and humans are by nature lazy, and it does not. And like you said, there have been test cases. It does not lead to more innovation and to great artists. It in fact leads to very lazy people who are reliant on the providers of the UBI, which is of course the government. And the obvious issue that anyone could see if you look around the corner is whatever they set the UBI amount as, it will never be enough. People will never be satisfied. So whatever that number is, we know that we have a government that can't help themselves but overspend. We know that. They cannot, I mean, there's absolutely zero self-discipline there. So it's just going to be a way to, create a self-fulfilling cycle of more spending, more inflation, more UBI, which leads to more spending, more inflation, and more UBI, and on and on and on until, things are until it's Weimar Republic.
I
And
was just gonna say that. You took the words out of my mouth.
so it's a scary thing, and it is. I agree with you. It is a stepping stone to pure communism, and unfortunately, anyone who's read a history book knows how that ends. So
Yeah.
it kind of, but the fact that it's a bad idea in the absence of a better idea, right? It's like, what is the better idea? So let me kind of get back to AI taking jobs. I wrote this in a Substack post recently, like there are 3.5 million truckers in the United States. And by and large, they make a decent living. They support each trucker on average supports 2.5 people with their salary, 2.5, right? So these are heads of households, 3.5 million of them. And self-driving cars is coming. It's coming soon. I mean, certainly within a decade, possibly within 5 years. So let's just, because I like to isolate it down to like one solvable problem, right? Let's not solve AI taking over every middle class job and like lawyers. I mean, the stuff you can do now. My lawyer is ChatGPT. Let's just talk about the trucker. What are these truckers going to do? I mean, you get to like a learn to code kind of thing. Like what is the answer? Like do you know? Like I have no answer. How do you take 3.5 million truckers who, let's be real here, these are in large part out of shape, older demographic, people not trained for much else. What are they going to do?
Well, so, I'm not going to purport to say that I have solved the entire, economic scenario around every version of what AI might not do. So this is just a brainstorm. But I would imagine, we do have hundreds of thousands of, blue collar working trade jobs that need to be filled. And whether that is, a pilot, which you can argue whether that's kind of a typical trade, but a skilled job, whether that's a plumber, an HVAC repair person, a machinist, in a manufacturing facility. Now we have all of these nuclear plants that need to be built. There's a whole slew of existing and newer reemerging opportunities that I think we just need to be more proactive on how people get retrained. And I think retraining is certainly a superior avenue to promising something like UBI, because it's not just about the money, but it's also about the purpose. People who don't have work and don't have something to do lose a sense of self and purpose. They've even showed in studies, with retirement, that people that don't have ongoing activities and things that give them that purpose are likely to have dementia and Alzheimer's and all these types of things earlier. So it is a mental health and just a societal health issue to go in and to create the retraining. And given the demographics, we're going to have plenty of open jobs, I think, for quite a while, that most realistically are not going to be taken by the robot overlords. And that actually kind of goes to, um, what are the areas that are going to work. And I certainly think that there's going to be a flipping. Like you said, some of the white collar people are going to probably find it harder to do something, and they will probably go into small business and entrepreneurship, which means that we need to be rethinking the laws and the regulations around what it means to be a small business owner. We already have 35 million, but I think we're going to have more. because you will have, I think, a preservation of a lot of these blue collar jobs. And just like in a tech founder scenario, you may have the business founder and the developer. I think in some of these other areas, you may have the business person and the person who's more of the operations person. And so I can see a lot of folks teaming up in that way to create businesses around these things that are going to be, less likely to be displaced by physical AI, robotics, and the like. And I also think any place that has sort of a human element, and you can think about this from, the plumber to your financial advisor, is also probably not going to turn over as quickly as possible. And I use the example of robo advisors as sort of my example point. Do you remember when robo advisors and fintech came on the scene? I mean, it was game over. There were going to be no more financial advisors. You have this, robo advisor that can create the perfect portfolio for you. You're going to pay low fees. Why would anybody want to have a financial advisor? And
Yeah.
it's because people don't want to just look for an answer. They want somebody to explain it to them. They want someone they can call when there's a problem. They want somebody to do the work for them. They want validation. They want to check in on things. And the statistics I've seen, anywhere between 1 and 5% of the market is robo advisors, nowhere near the sort of cataclysmic shift that you might have thought. And I think that you're going to see the same thing in certain areas. There are certain areas where I think people will be fine, but we know how it is, right? We're on social media, Phil, and you say something and then someone asks the follow-up question and you're like, you could just look that up. Like, you could ask Grok, you could ask Gemini, you could go to Google. Like, why are you, like, in the same amount of time it took to ask me, you could just find the answer. I don't need to tell you, but people don't want to do that. And so there is still going to be these haves and have nots. I think the people who are proactive are certainly going to benefit more. But, in terms of business, I feel like that is entrenched in human nature. And so humans for a while will probably keep the robots, even if they exist, at bay in certain areas.
So the first thing we got to do, we take all the Ivy Leagues, we defund them, we turn them into trade school training programs. We'll be way better off.
The Wharton School of Engineering and HVAC.
Oh, it'd be great.
Yeah.
That'd be perfect. Um, so I think on the personal level, the case for small business, it is, very much that, AI is coming and AI is going to take a huge amount of the legacy jobs at the big companies away. But I think there's also a feeling where, our parents' generation work at a company for 30 years, and then you have a defined benefit retirement program. You get a gold watch, the team takes you out for dinner and give you a toast, and they give you a lovely send off. And today, corporations are completely disloyal to people. They expect the people to be loyal to them, but they treat them like crap, especially when they get older. They'll fire you at the drop of a hat without
Yeah.
thinking twice. There's no reason for people to be loyal to a company anymore. You don't get that, defined benefit. It's not like you're going to be there for life and then retire happy. So I think, a lot of people stuck in this corporate system are really missing. They're really like, they're really getting the short end of the stick without knowing it. And, people are very concerned about, what my salary is or the uncertainty of small business, but they're thinking a lot less about quality of life and, self-agency and self-fulfillment and these things, living day to night by passive aggressive emails back and forth and whatever it is that corporate people do all day. It's a miserable existence. And I know a lot of people, I mean, I am one of them, as are you, that went from big corporations to being independent and working in the small business or entrepreneurship. And it's just it's a very different life. It's a lot scarier, it's a lot less certain, but it is more fulfilling. It is not for everyone, so I'm not saying that everyone should, but I think on a personal level, I've made this case, and I've in my writing and I've talked a lot about the reasons why entrepreneurship is a more fulfilling path and why I think it's better. What you did in the war on small business, you really made the case from a societal level why small business is better. It's better to support small business, transact with small business, and why small business is better for us as a collective people. Can you kind of help articulate that case?
Yeah, and then I'll circle back to what you're talking about. So basically, it comes to, decentralization versus centralization of power, which I think is the fight of our lifetime. It's been economically, and I think it kind of continues to be. And certainly as AI plays out, I think that theme is gonna pop up again. But you have, in terms of the economy, the private economy, if you cut it in half, you have almost 35 million small businesses across geographies, across industries, different sizes, whatnot. And then you have less than 20,000 big businesses. And so when you think about, who has the power to influence, who has the money for lobbyists, who has the ability to capture regulation, it really is those big companies. And so to the extent that we can get more of the economy in the decentralized arena, I think that dismantles or at least provides some sort of a check and balance, for what's happening in that sort of very concentrated piece of the economy. When you talk about small business, it is so true with corporations. We keep hearing these things that are so absolutely grotesque. People being fired like in en masse in like a Zoom call or something like that. I mean, it is very dehumanizing. And I think that those are the companies that are going to make a calculus and say, okay, well, I can save 15 cents by using an AI instead of a person or whatnot. And they may not care what their customers think and push it through. And especially if they're publicly traded, right? And trying to grow their earnings every single quarter and so on and so forth. We talk about entrepreneurship and owning a business. There's also just working in a small business. And regardless of what level you're at, there's a ton of those opportunities. And it is exactly the opposite tenor. I mean, small businesses are often run by families. They feel like families. People are connected. They have sort of a different quality of what their job is, and it's a very different scenario. And I think a small business owner's calculus is going to be very different, even if they could save a few bucks to replace a person with a robot. It's going to be very less likely. One, small businesses just don't like change, and they're so busy trying to stay alive, they don't have the desire to kind of make those kinds of changes. And so they're always slow to adopt the technologies. We saw that with websites, we saw that with the internet in general. And so I think that's going to be the same with AI. But I think just in terms of the types of things that people do in small businesses and in areas where there aren't big businesses competing, you're going to see small business as the bastion of what is going to be preserving and growing jobs. They already, by the way, compared to corporations, are the majority creator of new jobs. And I think that assuming that we can remove the barriers, and frankly, one way they could do that is making it easier to hire employees. um that there is sort of a unlimited upside, and I think that it could be a golden age for small business, just because the big guys end up fumbling the bag a little bit.
Right, right. Do you think it's possible for small business on an infinite time horizon, let's say, to still to compete against big business in an era where, big business lobbying, lets the government put their finger on the scale, where monopoly, all sorts of antitrust issues are not really being enforced. How does small business compete?
Yeah, I think that's you hit the nail on the head, is that to the more that the government puts their finger on the scale, the harder it is for anybody to compete, and small businesses tend to be on the other side of that scale. So I think that the best way we could do that is to have more people focused on, hey, we need more small business voices out at the table, and we need to make this fair for everybody who's competing. Because when you talk to small business owners, nobody's asking for special focus. They just want to be treated fairly. And if you're going to give a tariff exemption to Apple, who has tens of billions of dollars on its balance sheet, please explain to me why my small business is not getting the same kind of exemption. We heard during COVID that there were quote unquote non-essential businesses, and I've always said that was total BS. That anybody who is creating jobs, who's putting money into their community, who is being productive, who's giving customers what they want. Those are all essential. And no person should have the right to say that your business isn't essential. And so I think that that's just something that everybody needs to speak up and continue to remind everyone about, because it's funny, the more people who use their voices about things, the more they become a thing. The politicians don't pay attention until everybody starts getting up in arms about them. And too often people say how important small business is, but they don't do enough to stand up for them.
Right.
And even though there was 35 million small businesses, they're all so busy running their businesses, they don't do enough. They don't want to be bothered in the political sphere, but they have to, in order to preserve that, something that's a closer to a fair playing field. But going back to my idea, the hardest thing for a small business is to go from 0 employees to 1 employee, to be a solopreneur, to hire your first employee. And that is why, of the 35 million small businesses, only 6 million of them have employees. Some of them use contractors, some of them just, go solo or whatever. But it is so expensive in terms of all the additional taxes, above what it is that you have to pay for the salary, all the additional requirements. I mean, one of my favorite stories is that my sister works for me and she works from home on her laptop, and I have to pay workers' comp insurance for her and put up an OSHA poster ostensibly, I don't know, in her house or something. You know, we're in 2025. This is not how the workforce works. I can understand if we're, in some sort of a factory environment where, you might get impaled, but please explain to me why I'm spending, ridiculous amounts of money on things like workers' comp insurance. And so that's just like one example of all these stupid things that you have to do. It changes your retirement plans. It changes everything. And if they just made it simple and easy, we would have so much more productivity and so much more growth, which, by the way, is exactly what this country needs right now, especially on the back of all that government spending.
They want the barriers to entry. They want
Yeah.
it, right? In the asset management business, it's insane the amount of money, just fixed costs that go into compliance regulation is outrageous. And not for the great, nobody's being protected, right? Anybody who wants to do anything nefarious can easily find workarounds, and they do regularly. They haven't stopped the flow of financial scams. In fact, they're on all-time highs now,
Yeah.
despite this whole infrastructure of FINRA and the SEC and all these agencies. And they haven't solved anything. All they've done is created barriers and made it more difficult for the good guys.
Oh, I have a great story about that. So I'm a recovering investment banker, and when I left, kind of big investment banking, I actually started my own broker dealer with my husband, and we were focused purely on M&A. We didn't hold client accounts. We were just doing mergers and acquisition advisory, no big deal. And we wanted to have a broker dealer's license, and at first, it was with NASD, which was the precursor to FINRA and all these things, and you have to keep these files that are the same as the files that like a Merrill Lynch would have to keep. And even if you weren't in that business, you still had to have a filing folder that was labeled with a piece of paper inside that says, I don't do this. And it was the most ridiculous thing that we just, eventually gave it up and said, this is just completely ridiculous and untenable. But the amount of work I had to do, like, capital calculations and things like that. I'm like, why? This has absolutely nothing to do with me providing advisory services, making introductions, managing, a sell side process. I don't have any customer accounts. Like, what are you even talking about? And again, it's these regulations. They're not related to the way business is conducted today. And it just absolutely creates all these barriers for small guys and even if you can do it, it's just a giant waste of capital and time that could be used to productively grow your business.
Yep. Yep. It's outrageous. I consider myself free market economist, even an Austrian school economist, except for one thing, right? Except for one
Uh-oh.
area when it comes to monopolies. I do believe in monopoly enforcement, and it's kind of hard for me to reconcile the two. Like, I know very clearly that, we can't abide monopolies. Monopolies will crush everyone else. But it's hard to reconcile that with my, anything the government touches, anything, with regulation and rules, it just creates unintended consequences, and it creates, winners and losers, and insiders
Yeah.
and loopholes and all these things. It's a net negative. But except when it comes to monopolies, I want the monopolies enforced. Am I hypocritical about that? How do I reconcile the two?
I mean, I think most economists back in the day would tell you that there were no monopolies that were not created by the government, that it
Right.
was some sort of special, license or whatever it is that created the monopoly to begin with. I think that in the digital age, it's a little bit different, but I think that most of the companies that you would consider to be monopolies are those that provide infrastructure. And infrastructure is a government um, it's a government product. It's one of the only things that the government should be doing and dealing with. And so, in those particular cases, I think that it does make sense to break it up. But that's what the government does. It basically has to keep the playing field level. It has to make sure that our property rights that are natural are enforced. And yeah, I think that at some point, if there is a monopoly, that it should be broken up. The challenge with some of the things that are called monopolies nowadays, it's sort of unclear as to why, like, you say, oh, well, Google, also owns this thing, or Amazon also owns this thing that's in a completely different sphere. And you're kind of like, okay, but if you separated the two, how does that help?
Right.
So I think the bigger issue, when you have a company like Amazon, is the favorable treatment they get, or the cash that they get to go to certain places or whatnot, versus them actually being a monopoly in terms of competition. So
I mean, you could say that the reason why they own so many different things is so that they get away from them, right? Because Google is a monopolist when it comes to search. They have 95 whatever percent of search.
well,
But if Google is a broad technology platform, they're only
right.
30% of the tech space. And
And
it's
now AI is eating into their
right.
search finally.
Oh
So
yeah. Oh, search is done. When's the last time you did a search?
right,
Terrible. I mean, I would tell anyone who's watching now, just go right now on Google and Google, give me a recipe for meatballs, and then put the same thing into AI and compare the results.
right.
You got to scroll and click on links that are terrible and all that on search, and AI will just give you the answer you're looking for. The search is dead. Search is over.
Right. So that was sort of solved organically. It took a little bit of time, and it looked like, oh, Google was never going to have their comeuppance when it came to search. And look, now we're in a sphere a couple of years later talking about, oh, I barely ever go to Google anymore.
Yeah. Yep.
Yeah.
Well, one of my pet peeves is when people complain about the current, economic system in the U.S. They say, "Oh, you see, capitalism doesn't work," and what they're really referring to are instances of crony capitalism,
Cronyism.
of which
Because there
cronyism.
are no cronies in capitalism.
Exactly, exactly. So it's like, they've perverted the system, and then people are pointing to those perversions, saying the system doesn't work instead of trying to eliminate those instances of cronyism. Do we still live and operate in a pure capitalist system?
No, I mean, we really haven't. And I think it's important to define capitalism. I always call capitalism an unsystem, because it's just people who are making decisions freely and interacting with each other with the guardrails of property rights. So it's just, you know, free choice and us doing what it is that we do. It's not really a system. Nobody organized it. We're just doing it. The further away that you move from that, you move towards central planning. And I never like to put a specific name on that, because then people are like, well, that's not true socialism, not true communism. I'm like, who cares? It's the opposite of it's a handful of people doing things fairly opaquely, making the decisions on behalf of a large number of people, whatever it is that. So we have definitely moved further and further away from that. And we've seen other countries that you kind of think that about that have moved closer to, something that's like capitalism. And the ones who move closer to capitalism, it's been to their benefit. And the ones like us who move further away, it's been to our detriment. And so, we live in an era that looks nothing like that. And, we do our best to try to make those arguments, and to put and inject some free market hope into certain areas. But I think it ends up being a little bit more limited than most of us would like.
You've talked about the collapse of customer service, and this is like, I mean, it just infuriates me. I mean, everyone has a story, right? Every
Right.
single person has a story, and like, but younger people don't know that it wasn't always this way. Like when we were growing up, if you had a problem with an airline, if you had a problem with a car rentals or whatever, like you'd write a letter and you'd get a response and they would try to make it right and they would,
Right.
they would care. And this is before Yelp or whatever. It wasn't even about, it was just they wanted to do right by their customers. It was an ethos. It was a point of pride for companies, and
Right.
it just doesn't exist anymore. Why? What happened? What do you
Yeah, I mean, there's a handful of businesses, like I work in a small business, that's like a huge focus. We have VIP customer service, and that's like the whole point of it. And I actually think that it is a point of distinction. I personally think that basically most people do not care. They just do not give a you know what about anything. They were not taught that, like, whatever your job is, your name is on it and you should be proud of your work. Most people don't work in companies where somebody sat them down and say, no matter what your job is, one of your jobs is to make sure that the customer is happy and to go out of their way to, make sure that this relationship is strong. I don't even know that they think about it as relationships, but frankly, if you look at real relationships, those have been absolutely destroyed as well. So I guess it's not surprising that as, friendships and romantic relationships have been destroyed, customer relationships would have been destroyed alongside of it. And so when you do find some place that has that amazing customer service, it's like it's just so joyous, and you want to have that loyalty and that relationship with them, because it's something that was kind of baseline before, not even just outside of the box, but just kind of your baseline expectation. And now it's extraordinary, which is frankly pretty sad and says a lot about our, low trust society, and kind of the, morality and general characteristics of the people who are living in it. But, with every downside, there's an opportunity. So if you're a business person, great way to differentiate yourself.
Absolutely, absolutely.
What do you, by the way, what I know you have some thoughts on that too.
Well, I once ran a fund. Actually, my first fund as an independent was based on the theory that customer satisfaction is, we empirically proved it. Customer satisfaction is a leading indicator for a company. That, it takes time, but eventually, you're going to have repeat business and you're going to have pricing power and all these benefits
Yeah.
if people are satisfied with the product. But, everyone is so short term in their thinking these days. Everything is just quarter to quarter cut. You have, private equity ownership that's so far removed from not only the customer and the downstream effects, but just the long term, the longer term goals of the business, that they just don't care. I mean, I was in Las Vegas at a concert recent at a conference recently, and I was staying at Harrah's, one of these like crappy hotels on the strip. It was horrible, just total. I mean, you look at people, separate issue, but you look at these people sitting there at the slots and they look miserable. It's like they're spending money. Shouldn't they be enjoying themselves and having fun?
Right.
Anyway, put that aside. This hotel, um, I connected my phone to Wi-Fi. I tried to do my laptop. They said, "Oh, another device. You have to pay $15." There was no fridge in there. I said, "Can you send up a mini fridge?" I said, "Oh, that's $20." And we tried to check in at 1:30 p.m. They said, "Oh, it's an hour early. That's $50." And it's like, okay, fine. If you wanted, like I like Spirit Airline because I like the idea that I can fly super cheap. And you know what? I'll pay for all the extras. I'll pay the $4 for a Coke instead of getting it for free. And for me, it's like it's worth it to just, have all the fees be ad hoc. I don't mind that. But with this, it was like they create this like feeling of, nickel and diming, and they're like trying to get my dollar every way they can. But then they've got a casino floor. And if you want people to gamble at a casino, what you're trying to create is this attitude, oh, money, who cares?
Right. Right.
That's why they always give out free drinks, always give out free drinks at casinos, right? That's why they comp people, this and that. So it's like it didn't occur to them that they're creating this like feeling and attitude of being so cheap, and that I have to watch them so
Right.
carefully trying to get my money. And then they want me to just like go down and like drop a ton of money, like an idiot at a casino game. And it's like, doesn't
Yeah.
anyone there like have an idea of what you're trying to create? You're trying to create a place where people are spending money, not pinching money. And it's just, it's just you can see it's so clear and obvious when a company is owned by a private equity backer. It's so obvious because they're just so far removed from their mission. I understand these companies aren't expected to lose money forever. At some point, somebody has to come in, and clean up the balance sheet, but not in a way that, detracts from what they're trying to accomplish and from the customer experience. I mean, it should be so obvious.
All right, I'll jump in. I don't like to be the person to defend private equity, but it depends on what kind of private equity, because it's one of those things. It's kind of like Wall Street, where it's this catch-all,
Right?
and
Fair?
there are growth equity firms that are bringing in capital to grow, to expand the relationships, that are not the type that are coming in to cost cut and to align and to do a financialization transaction. So the private equity firms that are focused on the growth story are probably going to be more aligned. And I know a lot of examples of that. And then there are horrible private equity firms. I've had run-ins with many of them, that are on the other side of things. And for complete disclosure, I am an operating partner with a private equity firm that is on the growth side. And my philosophy is obviously very different than some of the ones I've worked with, who are coming in trying to cut every last dime, really only care about their own return on invested capital and things like that. So if you have that financialization mindset, it's going to be different. But I'd say the same thing about Wall Street. This whole like manage your business quarter to quarter and not having the long term view, which if you're an investor, it's not just quarter to quarter, it should be over long periods of time. That has also destroyed publicly traded companies as well.
That's right. 100%. I mean, the sacrifice at the stock price at the expense of everything else has all sorts of downstream negative effects long term. And these things they compound, and they compound so slowly. Like, taking a product, a food product, a packaged food product, right, and making it more efficient, more popular. The bigger it gets, they start making it more efficient. Little things that you don't. One day you wake up and you realize you're like, man, I used to enjoy this. It just doesn't taste good anymore. It doesn't even
I
taste like food.
know.
It's like all,
It's the
and
worst,
you look.
especially at a restaurant chain that you like, where it starts out and it's like, oh, this is like so cool. And then they've expanded. And then all of a sudden, it's like this food is not even recognizable
Right. It's now
anymore.
they make it that, oh, let's all make it at the central location, freeze it and send it over and let them
Yeah.
reheat it. And it's like, yeah, you can get away with that for a little bit, but eventually you can't. And it's just
Yeah.
like, we can tell. Like I
Yeah.
can't tell on
We,
on
we
a
know, right?
day-to-day.
You didn't pull a
Yeah,
fast one on us. We know.
it just compounds over time. It compounds, and you get to a point where it's just like these things that we love, these products, these restaurants, these places, they lose their magic, and it's so sad to see. And
Yeah.
it's a slow decay of these things. But again, then you've got, that's the cycle. You've got small businesses coming in, and that creates opportunity for them, and,
Right.
and it cycles around. Um, let's talk a little bit about big government, right? For the
My
Doge
favorite
cuts.
thing.
I mean, is that a disappointment or what? Like, is that all there is? That's it? The Doge? Like, it just started, it looks so promising. And then here we are now. It's the beginning of June, and it's like, that's it. That's it. We're done. Is that all we got?
All right, so right before we jumped on to record this, Elon couldn't take it anymore, and he put out a tweet that was, something to the effect of like, "I'm sorry, I can't take this anymore, but like, this is an abomination, and all you people who voted for this bill and all this ways, like, shame
Spending bill.
on you." Yeah, I mean, he just literally, it was like he tried to be nice, he tried to be diplomatic, and he just couldn't hold it back. And I feel like I'm like that, exactly like that. We just have a different financial bracket. So, but I totally get where he's coming from. And it's so frustrating because it is what we voted for, right? There's so many people who said, oh, you're going to get, Elon Musk, you're going to get Ron Paul, you're going to audit the Fed, you're going to Doge, you're going to like clean this up and give us a chance. And to see somebody, and
For it.
regardless of what you think of Elon, he put a lot on the line, right? He put his personal reputation, he put his time, he put his companies under attack to try to literally solve a pretty easily solvable problem, except for the fact that you can't get over the problem that is Congress. And so to identify, very popular, like, let's get rid of waste, fraud, and abuse. I mean, who doesn't want to do that other than the people benefiting from that? That should be a no-brainer. And I understand there's choreography, and it needs to probably be, have a phased approach so that we don't tank the GDP and, all those things. But that can be communicated. But the fact that nobody's come out and said, okay, here's the plan and here's how we're going to do this. It's just like, oh, here's this website that like identified things. And then we're just going to completely ignore that and do something else. Entirely predictable. It's exactly what I expected would happen, but still disappointing, even though you knew the outcome. It's like, that movie where like, it's going to be a bad ending and it is a bad ending and you're still disappointed because it could have been a better ending. I kind of feel like it's like that.
So the US national debt is just about 37 trillion
Yeah.
now. It's $107,000 per citizen. It's $323,000 per taxpayer. 323,000. That's just
It's
federal.
120+% of GDP. That's all that matters. I mean, if we had a GDP that was $60 trillion, then it wouldn't matter. But we don't. We
Right.
have $29 trillion in GDP. So it does
Doesn't
matter.
include unfunded liabilities, doesn't include state debt, right? When you add all that
Yeah.
together, we get to, I don't even know the numbers go that high. So what's the what do we do? Like, have we gone too far? Have we gone to the point where, there has to be a default, a debt jubilee? Can we roll this back? Like, what are the options that are on the table at this point?
I mean, so there's like we could spend an hour talking about every creative option that the Treasury has. All kinds of tools. The Fed, there are like you could do everything from revaluing gold to having a Mar-a-Lago Accord to they're talking about this sovereign wealth fund where people from or countries and central banks roll their debt and turn it into equity that's invested in Lord knows what. We could do these treasury, 50-year treasury backed gold backed bonds. You could, make Fannie and Freddie public and let people tap the equity in their house, with a very low cost loan to buy treasuries. I mean, like we could literally come up with so many crazy ideas to buy us time. There's two problems with every single idea. One is that they are highly inflationary. Inflation is the release valve because there's a difference between what's going on nominally and what's going on a real basis. And two, that all it does is buy us time. We can buy us the runway to fix it. And if there's no political will to fix it, then all we've done is just kick that problem down the road like it's been done over and over again. And we're going to be back in the same place, except that we're now going to have massive inflation at the same time that we're pursuing it. So it's it's a big mess. It's a big mess. The only caveat to that might be interesting is that while all the fiscal foundation stuff is inflationary, AI, if it goes in one direction, could be highly deflationary. But if they go then back to UBI or something, then that's going to be inflationary again.
Right.
But net, I think that everything is most likely like if you made me put a gun to my head, everything is highly inflationary, and we don't have the political will to fix it. So we're just going to be in this problem unless you could find a way to rein Congress in. If
Look at that.
Elon Musk, cannot do this and throws his hands up in disgust and leaves in a matter of a few months, like that's not a really great signpost, in my opinion.
Yep. Yep. All right. Let's leave off with something positive. What do you got?
Please, I'm dying for something. And the funny thing is, because I know both you and I, like, we know each other, we're friends. We're both actually very positive, optimistic people. And so, it's like you can't let this stuff seep into your day to day life because there's only so much you can control. We say these things as a warning to get people focused on, try to affect change. But at the end of the day, like, live your life, enjoy yourself, and don't take any of this too seriously after you take it seriously.
Exactly. We're going to be laughing all the way through the fourth turning.
Exactly.
Carol,
That's
where
what
can people
humor is a coping mechanism, people. Most people don't understand that, but it really is.
where can people find your newsletter, your books? Where can they find more of you?
Oh, that's the optimistic thing. All right. Well, on social media, especially on X, I'm at Carol J.S. Roth. I have my economic newsletter, which is currently free, carolroth.com/news. My legacy and wishes planning system future file, which helps you if you're trying to get your affairs in order and your loved ones don't know your wishes, your information, or where to find everything. $99.99 at futurefile.com. It's the greatest thing. Time, grief, and money in, really big times of need. And then, of course, I've got my books anywhere fine books are sold.
Excellent. Thank you, Carol. Thank you to listeners. It's great to be back, and we're going to do another one of these next week.